How much are you worth?
I have no idea. How much do you want?
No, I just want to know what you're worth. Over 10 million?
Oh, my, yes.
Why are you doing it? How much better can you eat? What can you buy that you can't already afford?
The future, Mr. Gitz. The future.
Welcome to Money Unplugged. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for being here. How are you doing? Are you enjoying the last days of summer? Are you already in back to school, back to work mode? Take a breath. There is nothing on the horizon of your life that you cannot handle. You got this. Today on the show, I talk with Adam Katz. He has spent his career in the financial services industry, and I did not know anything about him. For all of his success, I had never even heard of him until a listener emailed me with some background information about Adam and basically said, I think you would enjoy talking with this guy. And holy cow, did I ever. One of the things I like about Adam is that I'm pretty sure if he wanted to, he could just be retired, relaxing on a beach somewhere. But I don't think he is wired that way at all. He strikes me as someone who is laser focused on helping people figure out their own financial purpose in this world. That's why he self-published a new book called Making the Zeros Count. We talked about that. We talked about how mindset needs to shift gears the further along you get in your career. He absolutely has one of the most interesting jobs as a teenager that I've ever heard on this show. And we talked about arm wrestling. Yeah, arm wrestling. Not a topic I ever thought would come up on this podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will too. So let's get into it with Adam Katz. So you're in New Jersey now. Did you grow up there or did you grow up in New York?
No, I grew up in Rockland County, New City, New York.
And what did your parents do?
My dad was a guidance counselor in the Bronx for 31 years and then was an educator for another 13 at a local Hebrew day school. My mom was a speech therapist.
And what's the earliest memory you have when it comes to money?
Not having much. I talk a lot about, I thought luxury car was one that had a fold-down armrest and a headrest. The idea of it not being a bench seat was so luxurious to me. I never went on a plane with my family. I didn't really feel bad for myself, but Florida seemed like this elusive place on the planet that I knew people got on these things called airplanes. So it's an interesting dynamic. You know, my relationship to money from this early part was not one that I felt poor, but in hindsight, it was a very lower middle class life. But, you know, my parents did a good job of prioritizing certain things and used the house that they paid $36,000 for, which eventually my dad, when my mom died, sold for $650,000, but he only had $35,000 of equity in it. He used it as the biggest piggy bank to do, whether it was celebrations in college. So never really skimped on that stuff. But the day-to-day was not about abundance. It didn't feel scarce, but I tell people a lot that that's what I thought wealth was that little bump that you could rest your head on in the back of the car.
Was money something your parents talked about? Because obviously your dad being in public education, you know, there's not a lot of money to be had there. Was it talked about in front of you, or was that something that your parents sort of kept to themselves?
You know, they didn't really talk much about money at all, and not in a good or a bad way, an abundant, scarce way. It just was like a thing that I knew we had probably just enough to do things. I remember when my dad had his pension from New York State, which, you know, he had from 55 to 83 when he died, and it was probably $45,000 to $50,000. And I remember that while he was double dipping, if you will, when he was just teaching for another 13 years, those were the years where we would do some version of a drivable family vacation. And I knew there was an extra 10 or 20 grand on the account. I mean, when my dad died, my mom died 16 years ago, and then my dad inherited her 401k of sorts. And then when he died 8 years ago, he had $111,000. That was it. You know, which by some people's standards is a lot of money. By most listening, probably is a fraction of money you couldn't even see in your bank account. And so, you know, it wasn't talked about in a good, bad way. I think during my dad's eulogy, I talked a lot about how he could have gone to NYU School of Commerce, which is now the business school. He could have gone to NYU Law School, or he could have gone to NYU School of Education. And his mom was like, Erwin, people always want teachers. And during his eulogy, I said, my dad always felt like he was less than as it related to other people's professions and the financial reward that was visible from it. And I remember saying during the eulogy is what my dad probably didn't realize is he literally impacted thousands of kids' lives. And you talk about true wealth creation and force multiplication. It was pretty amazing what he did. And I don't know if he ever fully got the impact he had, even though he took a career that at the surface looked less rewarding, at least with financial rewards.
Yeah, those are the types of rewards that don't show up on a balance sheet or in a bank account. What was the first job you had when you were a teenager?
I taught haftorahs for bar mitzvahs. So for those that may not be as familiar, when you have a bar or bat mitzvah, you sing a song when you're in front of the ark, and there's certain notes that you need to learn. And I, for some reason, just like when I learned how to type on a QWERTY keyboard in 7th grade, I knew how to type without looking. You could memorize your haftorah as a song, but I learned all of those notes, which are called trope. And so I used that advantage to be a tutor. Now, in hindsight, I should have been able to charge $50 an hour. I think I made like $5. So I was taken advantage of. But that was my first job.
Was that something that you figured out on your own, or was that something where someone said, you seem to have a knack for this, you should think about teaching younger kids?
Because I learned it with the skill rather than rote memorization, I was in a unique category where, like, my cantor at the synagogue was like, you're one of the only kids who actually learned how to do this the right way, so you can now go teach. And I talk a lot about leverage and asymmetry of information, and I use that leverage back then as a kid to make money. As I said, like, I still remember I oddly would teach people these melodies in my brother's room. My brother was 9 years older than me, so he was long gone because I was probably, 14 or 15 years old. And I feel like we did it on the bed, which sounds really strange in hindsight, but that seemed to be my office back then. But again, it was funny because, I would get a lot of pride because I would teach these kids, and, it's one of the first seminal events of a life to be in front of so many people. For me, it was the real unveiling of my Rocky-like baritone voice. When I did my own haftorah, people were like, wow, you really sound like an old guy. But for most kids, this was such an important moment, and to be part of it so that they could execute excellently felt really rewarding back then. I'm very much a teacher in just my day, the way I think about life. And obviously my parents were both educators, and I always think about education as just an empowerment to create decision trees for really intentional decisions versus inertial forces. So it's fun.
Did you do that throughout high school, or at some point did you get a job where you're working for an employer?
It's a great question. I did it throughout high school, and I was very bad at the negotiating piece. So I don't think I ever made more than that $5 or $6 an hour. But other than that, I never had a job. My parents, even though clearly money was not abundant, that just wasn't something they focused on. They focused on, academics, sports, and things like that. In college, though, I had a lot of jobs. I was probably working 2 or 3 jobs at a time. And so for me, that was when I started. I wouldn't even say I made a lot of money, but I better understood the correlation of activity to financial remuneration. I had sort of salesy jobs in college, which was super fun. And I talk a lot about careers and frameworks around careers, around skills, knowledge, and relationships as the sort of the 3 pillars. And, that skill set of educational selling is so portable across so many different industries. So I started out, and the selling I was doing was there were 19 bars and clubs in Boston where I went to school that one company owned. So I would do the cold calling to the different college kids. And, I had the flexibility of going from, the Eurotrash bar to the piano bar. Like, I could sort of sell anything. So you could always find something that's universally appealing to people. And I made $1 a person. And I still remember when I was graduating, one of my best friends at the time, who was an econ major, I was a psychology major. And he's like, so what are you thinking of doing? And it was maybe it was a year before I was going to grad. I'm like, oh, I might go work for the club. And he's like, but Adam, you make $1 a person. I'm like, yeah, that's probably not really going to get me so far. So I did that. And then I also worked at a coffee shop on campus, which was fun also. But yeah, it's interesting if I think about, and then eventually in college is when I got my internships in financial services, which is where I went. Ironically, though, my first internship was unpaid, which wouldn't even happen. I didn't get credits. I didn't get money, but he did pay for my train pass. And I was on the train back and forth longer than I was in the office.
Oh, God. You went to Brandeis, and as you mentioned, you get a degree in psychology. When you enter and you pick that major, are you thinking about a career in psychology, or was that just a topic that interested you?
It's a great question. I have such a vivid memory of sitting in the career center, and it was sophomore year, and I had to pick a major. And I wasn't a great student in college. It's embarrassing given how expensive Brandeis was. I ended up going there with a little bit of a track scholarship. And so that helped defray the cost. But eventually I got hurt and it all went away. And it put me and my dad in debt, which I felt proud to be able to pay down pretty quickly. But the reason that I picked psychology, and it's funny because it sounds so perfect now, and it's not revisionist history, but I'm saying it tighter, which is I figured no matter what I do, I'll always want to know the motivation of why people do things. That was it. That was why I wanted to go into psychology. And at this point, if you meet me, I usually tell you I'm a therapist, which much to the chagrin of my wife, she gets quite annoyed that I was like, just tell me what you do for a living. I'm like, I'm a therapist. And I really do think I'm a therapist. Again, I don't use pharmaceuticals. I don't use couches. I use other tools, but I very much focus on, just like the theme of this conversation, people's relationship to money, the reorientation of relationship to money. I talk about the untethering of the umbilical cord connected to your most early memories of money, which usually requires like a bolt cutter of epic proportions and not something that you can find in the drawer. And that's where I have the most fun. And I really do think my psychology roots are way more helpful in how I spend my day versus an econ class, even though that would have looked more linear and obvious.
So you graduate, you go right into financial services. You're working there a bunch of years. I'm curious, what was going on in your professional life that made you think, it's worth it for me to go to NYU and get my MBA?
Well, I was lucky there in that it was an easy trade because they paid for the whole thing and I kept earning. So I did an executive MBA, which it's interesting. I would have never gotten in. I went to NYU. I never would have gotten in full time. I'm not even sure I would have gotten into the part-time program. But the executive MBA was a weird MBA where, I won't say it's a pay for play, but like it's expensive. And I had already been working at Merrill Lynch for 5 or 6 years. And it's interesting because I brought up leverage already as it related to information asymmetry of those notes for the Haftorah tutoring. I also found in a literal sense, having leverage is helpful through career arcs. And I had an offer away, and that the way they solved for it was to offer me the sponsorship to stay at Merrill. And that was one of my biggest and first learnings of like, wait, why didn't you do this 2 days ago? And, why not mark me to market, if you will? But I had to sort of force the hand by saying, hey, I have an offer at another firm. And they said, well, you've been talking to us about this executive MBA, we'll sponsor it. So for me, there was no economic trade. If anything, it was a 1+1. The difference, though, is that I owed some years of being there, which was fine. I ended up being at the firm for 20 years. So this was pretty early on. But for me, there was no economic trade. I almost did it as an insurance policy, Chris. I was a psych major, as we just talked about. So the idea of having some classically trained part of my CV around business and finance felt like it made sense, even though my career was accelerating pretty quickly.
Earlier this summer, I talked with Blair Duquesne from Ritholtz Wealth Management. She works with ultra high net worth clients. And one of the things she mentioned is that at that level, her clients are not worried about running out of money. They're worried about not messing it up. In your experience, where do you think that psychology begins? Because it seems like a mindset that would start before someone's net worth hits 8 figures.
Yep. So it's interesting, and I spent a lot of my time with folks going through these step function wealth creation events. I went through one myself, which I say gives me this unique ability to be both a peer and a provider. And I think that what goes on with a lot of people is the scarcity mindset. They just can't get their head around the compounding nature of this new starting denominator. So one of the things that I talk a lot about is, and I have all these different ideas, frameworks, I call them carries, is the 3-digit rule. So no one knows more than 3 digits from the left what they've got. If you close your eyes, you probably can't get past 2, definitely not 3. But what's weird is if you had $837,220, you're probably saying you have $837,000 in the bank. You're not really remembering. But what's weird is if you have $83,712,000 and you're saying I have $83.7 million. Like, you're literally rounding by $100,000 units. And that's weird because most of the world and life decisions takes place in the digits all to the right that by definition you just proved to me have no utility to you anymore, which is really weird. And so I think what happens is it's very hard for people to get their head around the unitization of money. Because when you were talking about like my most formative memory or some of my first memories of money, one of the things I love talking about was the first time I saw a $100 bill.
Oh, right.
And what that meant to me at the time and what my denominator was of net worth. And if I fast forward today, is that a $10,000 bill? I don't know. Is it a $5,000? And then when you start thinking about your units of money for generosity, for donations, for investment. So going back to this question, I think a lot of times what happens is people's like marginal utility curve is weird around consumption. And that like that goes to 0 pretty quickly when you get into the 8, if not 9-figure wealth. And then the utility really goes towards other curves around what I call random acts of daily financial kindness, generosity, familial support, actual charitable support. And one of the things I say is that the only competition for living an unbelievable life, and I mean memory making, I mean showing your friends and family and kids about your value system. I don't just mean going on vacation. Buying some stuff, which I think is oddly vilified, but it's okay to buy some nice stuff, is some terminal value you and if you're married, your spouse care about exists when you're dead in your account. And what's weird is, most people that I meet typically have more actuarial life ahead of them than behind them. And they've got decades of compounding. And even at a paltry 5-6%, you're doubling every 12 to 15 years. With the law of 72. So like I start helping people, you're like, well, if you have $30 million today and you're 45 and you make it to 81, 36 more years, I'm like, well, it's going to keep going from, what did I say my starting number was, 40? Did I say 40?
30.
30. So 30 goes to 60, it goes to 120, it goes to 240. Now, inflation will eat away at what that is. But if I say to people, hey, do you care about that number? Like, what if instead of 240, it was 160, but it means that you taught your kids this, or you went on these unbelievable memory-making vacations with friends, or you added an amazing extension to your local church? Do you care about the number? And I'll never meet anyone that says yes. No one's optimizing for a terminal value when they're dead. So then when you start layering in this 3-digit rule concept, unitization of money concept, the marginal utility of a dollar curve flattens, like there's nothing you can't do. Then it's interesting because people start to unlearn that one gear that they come out of entrepreneurial journeys on of like they have to win everything. I'm like, you don't have to. You can make 5 or 6% a year. And yes, inflation will eat away at things, but it's not like you're not going to go do all the things. That's what I remind people of is while inflation is insidious, it's not like you're not going to go on the vacation. It's not like you're not going to buy the thing. Yes, it costs more, but do you care exactly? And I think that's where I've been able to have really successful conversations with people around A, showing them the math, and B, really pushing on their why. Like, why are we trying to grow this capital base other than just you're competitive? Like that's like a dumb answer. Let's unlearn that Pavlovian response to everything that you've got to win. My favorite thing to tell most people I meet that have created real wealth is like, get off the 1-speed fixed gear bike. Let's find you a 3-speed. Let's find you a 10-speed. You don't need to win every interaction. It's exhausting.
Before we go to the speed round, in getting ready for this conversation, I learned that in 2009, in your division, you won the New York State Arm Wrestling Championship.
That's right.
How did you realize you were good enough to compete in something like that? Because arm wrestling is not like darts or billiards where you can practice on your own. Like, how'd you get good at this?
All right, so there's two things. One is I'm going to use this central theme again of leverage. Like, I just really understand math and physics in a weird way, in that I understood arm wrestling has a lot of physics involved. I also tell people you got to be really strong to start. A lot of times people, to make them feel better, they'll be like, oh, it's like all technique, right? I'm like, no, you got to be really strong first, and then it's technique. What happened was it's a fast twitch muscle exercise, if you think about it. So I think that the equation is force equals speed times mass. And what I was a long jumper in high school and college. Like, that was what I got recruited to do. So I could dunk anything I could palm, and I'm 5'8". So I had some crazy fast twitch muscle. And so when I got myself, I got into a pretty sedentary lifestyle in my early 30s. I got really, really fat, where like my body looked like SpongeBob SquarePants, like in terms of the shape. It was not good. And so when I got myself back in shape, I did this thing called the Men's Health Urban Athlon, which was super fun, but like I couldn't like win it. And being in college and high school, like I would win these big track meets, like there'd be 100 kids and I'd win. So I sort of knew what that felt like, and I wanted to win again. And I used to hustle people arm wrestling as a kid. And I'm like, well, here I am in my mid 30s. Like I can't go long jump again, but like there were these arm wrestling tournaments in Brooklyn and in the city and in the Bronx. And Dan at the time, I would like schlep her and my 2-year-old at the time to these arm wrestling tournaments. It was ridiculous and awesome at the same time. And then, I ended up and again, it's not like there's 1,000 people that come to these things. It's a pretty self-selected group that decides to go to arm wrestling tournaments. But I was really good at it, and it was fun, and it's like the most visceral, like mano y mano, right? It's quite literally that. So yeah, it definitely gets a chuckle out of most people, as I'm sure it did, as you looked it up, being like, who even does that?
I did go down a bit of a rabbit hole of just sort of past winners and, where the events take place and all that sort of thing.
The positive, Chris, is I got myself back in shape. I just turned 50, and I went through a lot of stuff, and I got myself back in shape where like it looks like a more obvious conversation to have, but it wasn't for a little while. We all go through ebbs and flows of our physicality, but I'm real proud to be able to embody what I said before around financial wealth really being a gateway to time and autonomy and health wealth, both physical and mental.
What is a thing you've bought that makes you happy?
Probably a car. I'm a car guy. I think as a kid walking around sort of the same place, I'd see those cars with the headrests and the armrests. I think I just always wanted cars. And so for me, when I sit in the cars, and I still like the combustible engines, like I like the feel. And I tell people a lot that like, yes, it's a point A to point B mechanism. I fully get it. But I hope people, if they have the means, find something that viscerally makes them feel the way that I do when I get into cars that I buy. So I got something about a couple of years ago that I really, really liked.
Have you made a purchase in your adult life that you regret, and sometimes you find yourself still thinking about it?
It's not that exciting of a one, but a nose hair trimmer. It was a very, very impulsive. I'm like, I guess I need one of these. And like, it just sits there. It's like such a dumb, I know it's not a big dollar number, but it was definitely one of those that I'm like, Dan is like, you're never going to use that thing. I'm like, oh, I guess she's like, but you use these other things. So I don't know. I know that's a pretty lame answer, but I don't know, sort of funny.
No, but you touched on something that's come up before on the show, which is that, whether it's a regret or a splurge, it doesn't have to be a lot of money spent to feel a certain way. You can regret something that you only paid $5 for.
Yeah.
On the flip side, what is the last thing you splurged on just for yourself, not for your wife or kids?
Yeah, no, what I tell people is this book I wrote, I self-published it. And, we're in a real 6-figure number. When you think about the coach that I hired, my editor, my general contractor, I call her for the self-publishing. My book looks like a book that would be at Hudson News in terms of the paper quality, the illustrator I had. So like that's the thing that, is most recent. That was, I tell people like that's really the thing I bought myself after I sold my company is my book, which is pretty on brand if you get to know me. But like I started to go into the balance sheet shift mentality versus consumption of luxury timepieces. I wore an Apple Watch for 13 years. And I started buying some nicer watches, which again, I look more as a balance sheet shift than like consumption. It's actually a pretty unfair cheat that as you get into the more luxury goods, most of the things you start buying are assets and you can like sell them for more than you bought them. It's like a cheat. It's actually pretty unfair. And the same thing with cars. There's a lot of cars you can buy that you can sell for more than you paid. And it's like this weird, unfair dynamic. And I think that's hard for people to get their head around sometimes.
What is one thing about money you wish you knew earlier in life?
I think that it wasn't the destination. It's the first thing I talk a lot about with people, that it's a gateway. And I know I alluded to this already, but really understanding that without intentionality, you will just keep thinking that you should accumulate more and more zeros in that account. And if you can use it as a gateway, and as I say, to time wealth, autonomy wealth, and health wealth, then you understand the why. And I think I wouldn't have understood that in the house I grew up. This wouldn't even been a conversation. I thought doctor, lawyer money was the real wealth. I actually didn't even know what a businessman was. My friend got into Wharton when I tried to get into Normal Pen, and I'm like, what's Wharton? So to me, it was just so far removed from my vernacular. But I think for me, the idea of having excess money that can make more money for you while you're sleeping than working, just wasn't even in the realm of stuff.
What is a charitable cause that you like to support?
So Dan and I are really intentional about this. So I talk a lot about raising kids in a Zillow world, meaning like when most of us were kids, like you didn't really know what your family spent on themselves or on other people. That symmetry's gone. Your kids know everything about what they spend. So Dan and I, my kids are 16 and 20. We're really, really direct with them about to the dollar of what we donate. What we spend, right? I say it's a numerator absent a denominator of like spending and of income and balance sheet, but they know exactly how much that car costs or that watch costs or the vacation costs. So what we do is we're really direct. And so we like hyper-local stuff. So we've done some really cool stuff for our local community. The thing that we're probably most proud of is for our local synagogue, we did a really big cosmetic renovation. And it's funny, I talk a lot about that's the what we did, and absent you explaining your why, people can come up with their own narrative. Like, we're not the most religious people. We don't go to synagogue that often. But we tell people what we did it so that when other families move to this area and they're looking at different synagogues, we want people to walk in and say, wow, this place is ready for the next 30 years, not the last 30 years. So we tend to like hyper-local stuff that has real impact. I would say other things, we spend a lot of time on bereavement around kids. In connection to different summer camps. Summer camp's been a big deal in our life. While I wasn't a kid, I lost both my parents. And so the idea of, sort of connecting that memory making during the summer when it's a hard time because you don't have school for the kids, having a place to help send them. So we've been able to send a lot of kids to these camps. And again, my kids are really involved with this stuff, which has been awesome.
Do you have a favorite movie or TV series that has money as a through line?
Oh yeah, Brewster's Millions. It's my favorite one. I bring it up every time. It is so hard to spend money. You can donate infinity, you can invest infinity, and that is going back to some of the utility of money stuff, like that steak you love, that handbag you like, it doesn't cost more because you're wealthier. And if anything, with that 3-digit rule, it starts to uncomfortably become this indiscernible drop of water, I say, meaning like it's a drop of water living in a bathtub or a thimble or a teaspoon. Once it's in a teaspoon, you can start to see it, same droplet of water. And what's weird, though, is that when you got the bathtub full, there's only so much you can do. And I think that's hard for people. So I talk about Brewster's Millions all the time. It's obviously a little bit of a dated movie now, depending on who I'm talking to. But, when you look at the fact that the premise, for those that haven't seen it, is it was Richard Pryor. He's a AA, baseball player, and he somehow is the lone heir to what is depicted as a very crusty white man. So it's obviously meant to be ironic, probably not a movie they'd make today. And the guy says you can either, inherit $1 million today, which would be unbelievable. This was probably 50 years ago, 40 years ago, or you have the chance for $300 million, which, today would be like, I don't know, like 500 billion, who knows what it would be. And he said, but you got to learn to hate money as much as I do and spend $1 million a day for 30 days. And there was a whole back plot to it around a nefarious law firm looking to get it. But you find that everything he's doing, he thinks it's hard to spend. Everything becomes an investment, and he gets clever and all that. But I love that movie because I think it hits home that at some point there's only so much you can buy. So my whole point to people is, what else are you going to do with the money? How are you going to make the zeros count?
I'm glad you touched on because, whenever that movie comes up, I think people, rightfully so, think of Richard Pryor. But I'm glad you touched on what sets the whole thing in motion, which is this old man at the end of his life. And it's, the movie's a comedy, but it's kind of sad that this old man is just like, he's come to grips with the fact that he's going to die, and there's a little bit of, what have I done with my life? All I've done is make money. And hence the whole, I want you to hate money while you're still young.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I work with so many wealth creators in their 30s, some are in their 40s, some are in their 20s, but really, really have a lot more time ahead of them, as I said. And that movie obviously isn't as mainstream. But when I explain it, it's so obvious for people around, like, what else are you going to do with this money and how are you going to think about it? And again, I do think it's important that people take stuff out for a spin, like try donating differently, try buying some stuff, luxury. I don't know, the luxury market exists for a reason, I tell people. And it's not just for aspirational folks. But, the thing that I try to impress upon people the most is just be mindful of the what is what people can see, and the why is your narrative of what's motivating the behavior, whether it is a donation, whether it is a really outlandish tip at a restaurant, whether it is that watch you bought. And so I'm really purposeful about that. And I have this little graphic that I talk about, which is you've got two icebergs and you can see the tips next to each other in this ocean. And that's the what. And it tends to be the material stuff that we can all see, whether it's the jewelry, the watches, maybe a car, maybe even a house. But beneath the surface, one of those icebergs is actually a popsicle stick. There's actually nothing there. On the other, there's a huge iceberg that's infinitely bigger than what you can all see. So I try to help people think a lot about those dynamics as they come into money, as they think about the spending. And most of the stuff that we're talking about that people can see that's visible and portable really isn't that expensive in the scheme of true wealth and can be usually bought with leverage. So again, I tell people, be really focused on explaining your why, because absent that, people come up with their own narratives that tend to suit them.
The last thing is a penny for your thoughts. And this is just any kind of wisdom you've picked up along the way that you want to share with people who are listening. And it doesn't have to be about money. It can be about anything.
It will be a little bit about money, but it's really about generosity. So I alluded to this concept of random acts of daily financial kindness. I spend a lot of time being deliberate and intentional about these acts that you're not there to witness what happens, but have huge impact. So what I tell people is, as you get comfortable with your units of money, try putting in places like in that little tiny teaspoon where it's going to matter, and it will bring you more joy than anything you could ever buy.
There you go. You can check out Adam's book, Making the Zeros Count. I included a link in the description of this episode. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.